We're going to start this book, Atheist Turns to Christ. And this book, I'd like to say, is as much for the people who don't believe in God, for atheists, for the intellectual scientists. If you listen to this video, and eventually this book will be put in print, the miracles and the encounters I have had with God since my conversion, I don't expect you to believe them if you don't believe the Bible. It would take you the same faith to believe these testimonies as it would to believe the scriptures of the testimonies of men who had encounters with God from the beginning of time. We have a book called the Bible. There are 66 books. It's personal eyewitness accounts and testimonies, each man giving his personal account of his experience with God. This book is going to be about my personal experience with God, my personal experience with Jesus Christ, my personal experience with angels visiting me in the flesh. So you must have faith, and faith is a gift of God. But at least it's my eyewitness account. These things which you're about to hear actually happened. And I'm here to testify they did happen. My wife and my children on many of these testimonies were there. The best witness I have is God Himself. I did not do anything to make these experiences happen. They have begun in my life since I started believing in God. I was an atheist who turned to Jesus Christ, 1963, May the 10th, 10 o'clock at night. At some time in the book, I will give that testimony. I would like to dedicate this book, first of all, to my wife, Betty Sue, who I married when she was 16 years old. She didn't ever think she would marry a preacher. At the time that we got married, I wasn't a believer in anything outside the physical realm, outside of logic and common sense. She was faithful, and God gave her the grace to live an unusual life, because you'll hear, I was called to many hard areas in jungles, where she made a wonderful mess and taught our children how to read and write. And so I want to dedicate this book to her. I want to dedicate this book to Jesus Christ, because without Him coming that night, choosing the place where Him and I would meet, I used the term drinking coffee with Him. I had heard about Him. I heard people believed in Him. I heard people actually believed the Bible. I was not one of those that did. But after you have a personal encounter with Jesus Christ, I call it drinking coffee with Jesus. When you get to know Him and you know He knows you, it changes the whole reason you're alive. And so I dedicate it to Jesus Christ. This is His book. It's all about Jesus. It's really not about me. It's about what He can do in a man's life who didn't have any faith or any belief. I was not raised to believe in Him. If anything, I was raised not to believe in him. I'd like to dedicate the book also to my 4 children, Valerie, Victor, Valine, and Vaughn, who are all in the full-time ministry right now. They live, they breathe, their experience with Jesus Christ on a daily basis in their own ministries for Jesus. And they will give their accounts one day. And so that's going to be my forward, I guess. I never wrote a book in my life. We're going to do this book on audio and video, just what you're seeing, for the simple reason that people maybe not have time to sit down in such a busy culture that we have today and actually take time to read a book. The Lord willing, by His grace, one day this book will be put into print. But for now, we're going to put it on video and audio, where even people who can't read can hear this powerful testimony about Jesus Christ and what He can do in a human life. The book, I'm going to just ad lib. I'm not reading notes. I'm just going by the experiences, and I'm going to share these experiences. Even the ones that seem impossible really happened, these experiences. And the book is not going to be in no chronological order of any kind. As I feel in my heart the different testimonies come to mind, I'm going to share them. And I think when my book is edited and these films are edited, there may be a chapter 1, chapter 2, but I'm just going to share testimonies. And for some reason, the first testimony I'd like to share is some experience happened in Guatemala. Actually, it wasn't Guatemala. It was actually in leaving the border of Nicaragua, going into Costa Rica. I was called early to be a missionary, and I didn't go to no school to learn about it. I just went. This is in a time when we were serving the Lord in Nicaragua, and my children were pretty small. Betty was there with me, and we had served in Nicaragua. I believe this was in the late 60s. And I had gone through special pains to make sure our paperwork, our passports, everything was in order, because I didn't want to get to the frontier of Costa Rica to find out that my paperwork was wrong and have to go all the way back to the capital of Nicaragua. I believe at that time it was Managua. And so we got to the border, Nicaragua, and the guard there was not a Christian, of course, and I told him I was a Christian and we were servants of the Lord. He said, well, your paperwork is not right. You got to go back and do it over again. And the thing is, I already knew my paperwork was in order. And I said, sir, with all due respect, I don't have the gas or the time to go back to the capital. And I am a servant of the Lord, and this is my wife and my children, and we have to cross this border. We're going down south. He literally said, I'm the servant of Satan, and you're not crossing that border. I said, with all due respect, sir, we are crossing that border, and we're going to cross it now. I got in the truck. He called out a firing squad. I think it was between 8 and 10 soldiers. They all had rifles, He said, if you attempt to cross that border, I will have you shot. And I said, you go ahead and do what you feel that you have to do. But I feel that my boss, Jesus Christ, he is my king. And we will cross this border. And so we got in the truck. He ordered the men to put their weapons up to their shoulders. They locked and loaded. I told Betty and the children to get on the floorboard. I knew I had to cross that border at that time. I knew that we probably would all be shot. But at that time in my life, to obey the Lord was the only thing that made any sense to me. If it cost our lives, it cost our lives. But I knew we had to cross that border. So we crossed that border, and very slowly I started driving. I waited for the bullets to rip through the truck. And Betty and the children were praying. And we drove very slowly across that bridge between Nicaragua and Costa Rica. And I looked in the rearview mirror and they were still pointing. I didn't try to go fast. I drove very slowly. I noticed something strange happening on the Costa Rican side of the border. They were yelling in Spanish. Of course, that's all Spanish-speaking country. And by that time, we all spoke fluent Spanish, me and Betty and the children. And they were encouraging me. And, come on, gringo, come on. You only have a little ways to go. And they kept encouraging me. And I kept looking in the back at these men who had their rifles still to their shoulders, ready to pull the triggers. And once we crossed the middle of the bridge, we were in Costa Rican territory. And I looked back in the mirror and I saw the soldiers slapping each other, bending over, laughing, patting each other on the back, saying, that they had really scared me really bad. But it was a miracle to me that because they could have shot us and no one would ever know. And so when we got to the Costa Rican border, they said of how great courage we had. Why did we do that? And why did we risk that? And of course, I began to tell them about Jesus and that we were missionaries called to serve the Lord. Well, we got into Costa Rica. And I breathed a great sigh of relief. I'll tell you, I really did. And of course, Betty was scared that we were alive. And sometimes during this kind of a book, I'm going to get I'll get a little emotional because these things really happened. And by the grace of God, I'm here to share these things that really happened to my children and myself. And so God gets all the glory. Anyway, there was a work to do. We got into San Jose, Costa Rica. And I asked the people about where's the most dangerous place in Costa Rica. Actually, the people said there's one place that you don't ever want to go, and that's to the Sonbows Indians. And I believe they were the Sonbows Indians. Sometimes I might get the names of these tribes mixed up, but trust me, they were a tribe of Indians, and they said that if you go back there, they will change your mind. No one will ever hear of you again. They're very dangerous. Nobody ever returned from them. And I heard all these stories. And most of the Central American countries that we traveled, that was always the question I asked. Why? Why would I ask a question? I asked a question like that because my job, what I felt God told me to do, is take the name of Jesus Christ where he had never been heard of. I didn't want to go to where people already had known about Jesus and the gospel, because what he had done for me, how he had changed my life. People, I had a testimony that had to be shared over the whole world. And there's only one person that knows my testimony, and that's me. I was there in 1963, May the 10th, 10 o'clock at night. And that's pretty much was my mission, to take this message where not only it had never been heard, but the good news about Jesus Christ. How you didn't have to fear death again, ever, because there was life after death. Well, I ended up getting a horse. Got a Palomino horse, and a horse that got saddled. I took my gear, Betty and the children, stayed in a little motel there in San Jose, Costa Rica. And I left, not really knowing. I just took directions. Different ones tried to tell me, follow this stream. If you follow this stream to the end, you know, to the ocean nearly. I traveled east, as I remember. I traveled for, I would guess it was nearly 2 weeks, horseback. Of course, I couldn't ride at night. I rode through jungle along the edge of that creek. There actually was a trail, and the trail got better as I traveled. I found out with the Lord, you just have to start. You just have to go. You may not have exactly the idea where you're supposed to go or a map. Just go. Because the Lord will use people who are going better than people who are thinking about going. He has always been that solid rock for me and my family. Because I've always been a doer of His word. I couldn't do that. I started off the first 3 months after I got saved. I couldn't stay at home. I had to work till wee hours in the morning, knocking on doors, telling people of my experience. That great experience, that great night when Jesus came into my life. And so I was a doer. And as I learned the scriptures, I learned that those who do the Word of God have got a foundation so strong that when trouble does come, the winds of the storms will come, doubts and fears will come. But that solid rock are those who know the Word of God and are doing it. You got to do something about it. It's not enough just to know it. It's not enough to sing about it. It's not enough to pray about it. You got to put feet to it. You got to walk it. Go and do this. And so that followed that trail for many days and many nights, sleeping in a hammock along the side of that creek. And all kinds of things go through your mind. There was some areas so steep, I thought that horse would not be able to go downhill or uphill. I had to go up and down sides of mountains. I finally come back to the Sonbow Indian, Sonbow, I believe they were the Sonbows. And when they were pretty nice little grass huts, you know. And what was unusual is the people had clothes on. And already I'm understanding that these are not primitive like people had told me they were. And so they could understand Spanish. They spoke their dialect, but they could speak Spanish. And next thing I knew, these people were Christians. And this is supposed to be one of the most wildest tribes in Costa Rica. And so I said, well, how in the world do you know about Jesus? And so they took me to an area of their village and showed me a runway where an airplane could come in. And for years, a missionary, a brother in the Lord out of Canada, had been secretly flying in to this village and bringing them the gospel and clothing and many things. These were precious people in the Lord. So I spent a couple of weeks just encouraging them, and just they were encouraging me too. It was such a blessing to know that somebody had got there before me. But they were just, I just glorified God how I wasn't the only one out there who had a burden to go where the gospel had never been preached. There were others, thank Jesus. And so, we just had fellowship there for a couple of weeks, and so it was time to go back, and one of the boys, one of the Indian boys, he wanted to go back out with me, precious brother in the Lord. He wanted to carry some of my stuff. They gave me one of their homemade bows and arrows, how they hunted. And he actually came out with me. And it was quite a thing. We got some pictures of it and everything. And I went all the way back to San Jose. When I got to Betty and the children, and there was a strange thing happen. The next thing I know that I said, the boy just come to the end of the trail, and then he went back to his people, and I went on by myself. But so when I got to the room, next thing I know, I had a couple of detectives wanted to talk with me and start questioning me where I had been and everything. And I told them what I did. And actually, I had a couple pictures. In fact, that's something during this book. You're going to see if we can locate pictures that associate with the story. My son will phase in those pictures. It gives you a little more, maybe some confirmation, that it happened, and some memories there. But anyway, I had a machete. They looked at the machete for blood, and what's going on? And, well, they come to find out somebody a week ago or something had been macheted, chopped with a machete and killed back on that trail. And so I was a suspect. It's just like the enemy. The devil always tries to put his 2 cents worth in to try to take the joy away and the victory away. But after I showed some pictures of the horse, and I told them all about my trip. They could even go back and talk to the people. They would know that I was there. And it was only that day that I had that problem, and then I was totally taken off their suspicion list. And it was in Costa Rica. It was actually another beautiful thing that happened. We had received some money. Our ministry started off, I didn't even think you were supposed to receive offerings. I surely didn't read in the scriptures where you're supposed to send out newsletter. I eventually did start sending out because people wanted to know what was going on. But I totally wanted to trust the Lord in my children. I wanted them to see that you can trust the Lord. If you seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, He will surely take care of your needs. And that doesn't mean you're going to live high on the hog and have all your wants met, but your needs will be taken care of. And but we did receive offerings. Now, how did we do that? Well, Betty's mother, we always kept in touch with her and let her know where we were, and we used that as kind of her address, Betty's mom's address, as a place where people, if they wanted to send an offering, we didn't take offerings. I never did like ask for offerings, but people who felt their heart touched and felt led to help, they wanted to be a part, because I was told by one lady, we just can't go where you go. There's no way we could ever do what you do. But it is a work for the kingdom of God, and we want to help serve God in that ways. So we're helping serve the Lord in our way by helping you get where you have to go. And the Lord showed me that made real sense. So from that, we always have this little thing we say, we don't take offerings, but we do receive offerings. We don't want to stop people who feel led to give, not just money, but maybe a vehicle and things like that. That's happened all through our ministry. We just keep the work going. That's our job, is to keep going where the Lord tells us to go. And keeping Him first and His kingdom first. And you know what He does? He meets our needs. He takes care of us. That was in Costa Rica, the way I remember it, that one morning we got up and we were sitting out there drinking coffee. There was something that happened the night before that I did not want my wife to know, because we had received an offering of about $200. To us, that was an extraordinary large offering. And we had worked in Nicaragua for a couple of years. Betty was ready to go home and see her mom. And I was pretty tired. I thought, we need to go on. But that night, now I'm talking about the night before the morning there in Costa Rica, it was either a dream or a vision, but it happened that night. And I could see these people. They were painted very strangely. They were men and women. They were primitive people. They didn't have clothing on. They stood before me, like right in front of me. Oh, I guess maybe a dozen. And it's interesting that you heard that little phone ring right there. Now, that was my wife. And, I want this to be real. This is not professional. I'm not trying to do this anything professional, but that was an important phone call. And so while I'm writing this book, you might see me answer the phone. I want it to be real. I want it to be live. These are pearls. These are so precious. You know what? We don't have to exaggerate. We don't have to try to straighten things out. All things work together for good for them that love the Lord. And I'm so glad, because Betty, I asked her, I said, when we worked in Costa Rica, those were the Sonbows Indians, right? She said, no. Them were the Guatuso Indians. So the Sonbows Indians was the ones I went to in Nicaragua. And I'm going to share about them too. But anyway, isn't that neat how, I'm 72 years old. My mind sometimes, that's why I need to get this book out, because I still got a good mind, but I get things twisted a little bit sometimes. But these were actually the Guatuso Indians. I think it starts with GUA. And anyway, boy, that vision I saw. Now, I saw those people. They were brown-skinned people, but they were painted very strangely, right down the middle of their body. If you can just imagine a line right down the middle of your body. Half of their body was white, half of their body was red. And then there would be another one, half red and half yellow, and then half black, half white. And it was a black background, like a backdrop behind them was black, with a glistening capital letter P above their heads. And there was no words spoken. I looked at those people in their eyes, and I saw the hunger, I saw fear, I saw loneliness, I saw primitiveness, everything I saw in the faces of those people. So the next morning, we're drinking coffee. Now, I know in my heart that we're not going to be going home. That money is going to take us further. And this is a little bit of an emotional time because I've had to break the heart of my family. Kids were excited to get ready to go home, back to Texas. We'd been working hard, ministering hard, all the family. We worked like a team, like a unit. We helped each other. Betty was so looking forward. She was tired. And I knew I didn't have the heart to tell her that money that we had received was to go further down south. I believe the letter P meant Peru. That these you could look at these people and you knew they were Amazon. I mean, I've seen magazines, you see you just know they're Amazon Indians. So I sat there and I didn't have the heart to tell Betty. Another time in my life, I didn't have the heart to make a decision, and I needed the Lord's help really bad. But I wasn't going to say nothing about that. Sat there and I drinking coffee and was watching a couple birds in the tree. It was a beautiful day in Costa Rica. And she looked at me, and I talked about how pretty that morning was. And she said, "Don't you tell me you had a vision or a dream." I don't know what I did to clue her in. And she started crying. You know what? We all cried. But I said, "Yes, I did, honey. We gotta keep going south. We're not going home." And so it was powerful at that moment, where that's the way it is to serve the Lord. And, from my standpoint, that's just normal Christianity. That's not way out there over the top or anything. That's just, boy, you get to know the Lord's voice, and to whom much is given, much is required. So I knew he was going on. But so you know what? We had to go back to Nicaragua. If we're going to go on, there's things we had to go back and pick up. We didn't come to Costa Rica with everything we had, so we had to go back to Managua and pick up something. Betty would know exactly what we went back for. But boy, did I dread going back across that border. And I dreaded that. But you know what? We had no choice. Have to go back before we can go further on down south. So here we are at that bridge. And we're going across that bridge. And I said, "You know what, Lord? Whatever happens, happens. We might be arrested." I didn't know what was going to happen. Betty, we were just anxious, So you run into those anxious moments. You pray, and you think, we've got to have something more than just prayer. Let me tell you something. Prayer is not to be taken lightly. We just, Lord, you see our situation. We know you want us to go south, further down, and so just be with us, Lord. Walking into that unknown so many times, not knowing how it was going to turn out. Well, I'm here to tell you that we pulled up to that guard station. I looked at the place on the ground where those 10 soldiers stood with their like a firing squad where I remembered clearly. Well, I got our passports. I go into the office, and I don't see that. He was kind of like a general guy, all decorated in a uniform. He wasn't there. There was a young man, and when he saw me come through the door, he jumped up out of the chair and ran backwards against the wall. He said, I want you to know I didn't have nothing to do with what he did to you and how he messed with your people and he did a lot of things, and I didn't have no part of it. I was just, I want you to know I didn't have any part of that. That was all his. I said, what is the matter with you? Why are you afraid of me? He said, you don't even know what happened, do you? And I said, no, sir. I know that was a hard thing for my family to go through. And, oh my, he said, after you left, it was about an hour later. Said, I don't know if you remember that day, but it was a clear blue sky. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. And I didn't really remember that, but he said, look out there at that telephone pole. That was a telephone pole that had a transformer on it, but it was where all of their radio equipment came in. And it looked like a huge matchstick that had been burnt. It just was a crispy critter all the way to the top, and there was no wires connected to it. It was just, it just looked like a giant matchstick. It had been burnt. He said lightning came out of the clear blue sky and hit that telephone pole and burned it. It just set it on fire, burnt the lines up and everything. And we don't even have communication yet. And that man was so terrified that he asked for a transfer. And he's gone. And I'm the replacement. I'm here. I was here then, but I'm the one in charge. And you didn't even, I said, I didn't know that. But I'll tell you something. God backed up his word. It was a witness to this man. Now, when something like that happens, what does that mean? Does that mean God hates that person? No. Just the opposite. See, the Lord loved that man, and he planted a seed in him he'll never forget. And here we are so many years later, but you needed to hear that. That was an experience that I didn't know about, that God followed me with judgment. And I'll tell you some cases here recently before this book is completely finished. I don't know what it is, but sometimes where I go, I don't think it has anything to do with me, but the Holy Spirit and the anointing that is in me, because that's where Jesus put it when he came in. It's his ministry. See, I just carry the Lord's ministry around. That's all any of us do. We're the temple of the Lord. We're a power. We're a tabernacle in the wilderness filled with the power of God. And he'll back up his word. And it's never do you want anybody to be hurt or things like that. But the Lord loves people, and judgment is a sign of love, to turn them around from the path they're walking. Well, we went back to the Nicaragua and we got the paperwork we had to do. We came down back through that border with no problem. And we started that journey down through the mountains of Costa Rica, and then down below Costa Rica you have Panama. And so we're now going down through Panama. We got so high in the altitude one time that the children got the loss of oxygen. They didn't lose oxygen, but we got high above the clouds. That Pan American Highway at that time, right across the summit of some of these very high mountains. I don't know how many thousand feet we were up there. We were high. One time we got back there and the children couldn't even hardly stand up. They passed out. Valerie couldn't even hardly regain consciousness, and it was chilly and everything. But that was quite a trip driving down through there, and we saw other little grass huts and little villages going down through Panama. It's mountainous when you come out of Costa Rica, you know. And we got all the way down there into the Panama Canal Zone. And you guess what? The Pan American Highway ended right there in Panama. And so I said, well, now, because I just had in my heart that big letter P meant Peru. And that was just in my intention. So I was asking around, went to a couple churches, and I found out there was a Church of God. Brother Cadell, he was a pastor of a little church in the Canal Zone there. I think we owned it at that time. Our military was down there. The jungle was great training for our special forces and the Green Berets. They pretty much trained in that area. And Brother Cadell, he told me that there were other missionaries. There was some New Tribes missionaries. And so I found those New Tribes missionaries. They were doing great work there. And I asked them if they knew how I could get my truck to Peru. And they talked about how barge, maybe you could get a barge there in the Canal Zone. Because see, right there in Canal Zone in Panama, you can go down the west side of South America, or you can go down the east side. So I thought, this is a perfect place to get a barge. Well, it was 2 or 3 of them there, precious brothers in the Lord. And they said, why are you going to Peru? And I said, well, you know, I had this vision. And when I said that, they kind of looked at each other and they chuckled. You know, they just weren't, there's some people just have a hard time with visions. They kind of think they ended with the apostles and things. And I didn't pay no attention to that. I had seen that before. And so I said, well, and I told them exactly what I saw. And I told them how these were native people. They looked like Amazon Indians to me. And how they were painted and how they stood and that big letter P over their head. Well, I said, I noticed that their faces changed. They weren't laughing no more. They said, tell us again how you saw them painted. And I told them, well, they had a line down the middle that was half red and half yellow, half white, half black. To me, that was just really stood out. And I said, why is that important to you? And they said, you have just described how the Chaco Indians paint. I said, who are the Chaco Indians? They said, well, they're a tribe that migrated up many years ago out of the Amazon into Panama. And they're at war with the Sonbows Indians or the Cooney Indians. But they said the door is closed to the Chocos. And I said, what do you mean the door is closed? They said, well, we sent, in the last year, we have lost 2 of our missionaries trying to go back to them and trying to make contact with them, and they killed both of them. So that's the best thing we can just tell you. It couldn't be the Chocos because the Lord has closed the door. And so I said, well, I got a question for you. How is the door going to get back open without Jesus and without the gospel? And I said, well, if you think you're planning on going back to them, let me tell you something. They're dangerous, and they're still noted to be taking heads. They're headhunters. They're very dangerous. And, well, I could see the fear in their eyes and everything. But then they said, you know, before you would make a decision to go back there, would you go with us to the Army, the Panamanian Army base? And so I went with them to the Army base. And they talked to a captain there in the Army, and he was a gentleman. He said, this man's planning on going back to the Chaco Indians. Would you please verify what we're saying? They're too dangerous. And he did. He told me, he said, son, I was a young man then, and he said, "But just tell you right now, you go back there, you're on your own. We won't come looking for you. You'll be on your own. If you get lost, the Panamanian army fears the Chaco Indians. They're just too dangerous. And so that's all I have to say. We won't come looking for you. If you don't come back, we won't come looking for you. And you got a family. You need to think about it." Well, I had already thought about it. Yes, it was again going to have to walk into the unknown, trusting God. And that's a neat place to be, where you're walking into the unknown, trusting God. Let me tell you something. God deserves people to walk in the unknown with nothing but Him, trusting Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, and His holy word. He deserves that much out of us. I challenge anybody reading this book or seeing this video right now. You take what you got. You got to put in your heart a burden. That's all you have to have. If you got a burden for lost people, I don't care what country it is in the world, you go. You may have to leave with an empty cup, but I'm here to tell you, God deserves people to trust Him, and His word says, if you'll seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, He will take care of your needs. And I've done this for 50 years, nearly 50 years, and He's always taken care of my needs. You just go with what you've got. If you've got a burden for their souls, that's all. That's the Lord. That don't come from your flesh. That don't come from the devil. That comes from God. Don't worry about it. Just remember, Jesus sent out, how many did He send out? He sent out 12, and He took away things people trust in, like money, food, clothing, and shelter. He don't take anything with you. You just take what. Don't even wear 2 pairs of shoes. Don't take a lot of luggage. Go like you are. He sent 12 men out like that, called the apostles. Then He appointed 70 more. And He said the same thing to them. Now that's 82. I don't think He can make 82 mistakes. That's the way Jesus sends people. Now, I have nothing against people who go a different way, but this is the way I went. So anyway, I knew I had to go. Now I knew I had to go down that biannual river. Actually going south, for some reason, that river flowed into the ocean. I guess you'd call it the Pacific Ocean, but it was up current, because as you get going down toward the Dadiana province, Biannual River, it comes out of the mountains down there. There's mountain ranges down that Panama all the way into Colombia. So it was a pretty sweat. It was a big river. It was a muddy river. And I just thought, if somebody could, go with me, another brother in the Lord, a pastor, maybe the Lord had called somebody. I love to go by twos when it's the Lord's will. But as so many times, nobody felt led to go. I was in a little church in Panama Canal Zone, Panamanian church, and I was giving my testimony. And after that testimony, there was a little 12-year-old boy. He came up and he said, "I'd be glad to go down there." He said, "I think I know who you're looking for." Now, he said, my dad, he used to go up that Biannual River, and he'd cut logs down, big cedars and stuff, during the dry season. And then when the high waters come, they would bring those logs down. Every man that cut logs down there, he had a brand. He had his own initials and some type of identification. So when all these logs come down in the high water, come downstream there, head toward Panama, they would select their logs out that belonged to them. And he said, my dad, there was one place, he said, "Don't ever stop here. There's some dangerous people." And he said, I think he was talking about those Chaco, those headhunters. So he agreed to go with me, a little 12-year-old boy. He had faith. And he said, "Now I won't go in the jungle with you, but I'll at least show you that place." And So I got what I thought I needed. I'd never really been in the jungle blazing a trail. I didn't, I read books about it and everything, but nothing can take the place of blazing your first trail in the jungle. And my heart was right because I knew someone has got to get to those chocos and tell them about Jesus. You know, a lot of people, when Jesus said, go into all the world and tell every creature the good news. You know, that meant something to me. I knew I couldn't get to everyone, but I had the calling of going where Jesus had not been named. And so that was right up my calling. And so down the little place on the river, it was a little town called El Llano. And it's either El Llano or Chaco. I'd have to look on the map. Betty would know. But I had to leave my wife and my 3 babies. Valerie and Victor and Valine. Vaughn wasn't born yet. Valine was just a year old. These were small babies. They were children. And I had to have a lot of faith just to leave them there. And I drove that truck as far as I could down that old muddy road, down the Bayana River. And there was the last place, that's where the road ended, this little town. And I rented a little brick grass roof building. It may have had better roofing on than that, but it didn't have much of a door. Just I think it had a blanket for a door.
And the kids stayed in Chaco.
I guess
town on the river.
It was Chaco. So I'm hearing someone tell me it was Chaco. So anyway, I left them there, and that little boy and I, we took off in a little dugout canoe paddling upstream down the Bayana River. But you know, it wasn't that far. It was most of a day, I think, and we came to a place, and a little bend in the river, and he pointed and he said, over there is where my dad told me these dangerous people lived. So we pulled that boat, and he said, I'm not going to go in there with you. And I said, well, boy, I just thanked him, you know, it was so precious that he took me that far. Actually, there was another missionary really close to that point. It was past where there was that little house back there, another missionary, but he wasn't working with Chocos, he was working with the Sonbows Indians, or the Kuna tribe. And there was a little village of Kuna Indians there. And they were the enemies of the Chocos, and the Chocos were enemies of the Kuna. You know, and I can't remember his name, but it was past his place, and I told him what I was getting ready to do. And he had never been back there. And I guess he had heard some rumors too. But anyway, so I'm taking off, and of course, I didn't get much done that day. If I remember correctly, I slept there pretty close. I didn't go in very far. I slept that night. And the next morning, I was excited to get started cutting. Well, I didn't even know that machetes, brand new machetes that you store bought, brand new, they weren't even sharp. They looked sharp to me, but I didn't find out till later that you have to sharpen them with a file. They have to be razor sharp to go through a jungle. And so, but you know, the Lord saw my heart, and I took what I had, and I started blazing me a trail going what I thought was west. But when you get under the canopy of the jungle, you soon find out you pretty much don't know where west is no more. You can't see the sun. You can barely see the sky. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you need a flashlight to even see where you're walking. This is real jungle, rainforest. And I was wearing myself out chopping all kinds of brush and all kinds of ferns and vines that you find in a rainforest. I was working real hard. I was strong and young, chopping my way through there. And I was just, my heart was driving me on. And suddenly I broke through a real thicket of vines and ferns and jungle plants. And here was a path. Just like a well, if you ever seen a cow trail, that's exactly what it looked like. And I looked down in there and I saw a human footprint. And I thought, you know what? This trail's going in the right direction. It may be the Chacos. And if this is it, all I got to do is just follow this trail. Well, I was going to follow it anyway because I wasn't making too much headway with that dull machete. So here I go. Now my heart pumping now. But I'm going to tell you, that's just the mercy of God. I have been in jungles for years looking for lost tribes, uncontacted tribes. And I didn't realize how big of a miracle that was till I went down into Brazil in the Amazon jungle looking for other Stone Age tribes. You don't run into trails. This was a trail. There was a miracle. And so I followed that trail all that next day. A couple things happened on that trail. As if I ever met Satan, not face to face, not visible, but in my mind, I met him. It just came out. I was excited all of a sudden. It was like questions were coming into my common sense and my logic. Like, what kind of a man are you? What kind of a father are you to leave your children in a strange village? What kind of a husband are you to leave your wife scared and lonely back there? I should tell you too, I told my wife in that little town where we had the truck that if I didn't come back by 21 days, give me 3 weeks. And if I didn't come home, if I didn't come back in 3 weeks, I probably would not coming back. I'll see you in heaven. And you just sell that truck and get you a ticket, you and Valerie and Victor and Feline. It should be enough to get you back home. So that was the deal. If I didn't make it back in 3 weeks, that she was going to sell and leave. And that's just the gospel. Let me tell you something. To get the gospel to the lost, it's worth giving your life up. It really is. To live is Christ, to die is gain. And I was learning that early on. If you're not willing to lay your life down, don't go into these areas or go preach the gospel anywhere, really, because it could cost your life. And if they're not worth dying for, then you're probably not called to go. But that's one of the costs you need to count. Anyway, it stopped me in my tracks, those questions. But there was another voice. It's just all happening in my mind. This ain't happening audible. It's in my mind. It's in my logic, in my intellect. Those questions came. But it was enough to stop me. And I started thinking, what am I doing? Is this some crazy adventure? I just want some adventure. There was another voice, another thought. I'd say voice. It's like a voice. But there was a thought. 2 words. Trust me. And I recognized that voice. I knew who that voice came from. That was Jesus, my shepherd and my king. And whoa, man, that must have been Satan. You know what? He usually does ask questions to cause you to doubt what you're doing for God. So I kept it going. Well, I come into an area of palm trees that there's different kinds of palm trees throughout the jungle, many varieties. This particular palm tree is called a Hita palm. And it's got black spines, about 6 or 7 inches long. And they literally cover a palm tree like thorns cover a rose vine. You can't walk through them. They'll stick you, they'll punch you just like needles. They're not soft, they're hard. There was only one way. There was like an orchard of these trees, and there was only one way through it. There was that trail I was on was the only way. I'm walking down that trail, and about halfway through there was a big lizard laying across that trail. Now, I knew what iguanas were, because in Nicaragua we actually learned how to clean an iguana and eat the iguana. And yes, it does taste very similar to chicken if you clean it right. Well, this was a huge iguana, and the thing was different about this iguana. It was not afraid of me. I didn't want to shoot it. It was too big to eat in one meal. It looked like 15 pounds. That thing was not afraid of me. It was defending that trail. Well, I had a little .22 rifle with me. Back in those days, we carried a .22 rifle on the bus. And so it was just a little single shot. And I thought, you know what? I've got to go down that trail. There's no way around this trail. It's all them heat of palm, and branches would fall from the palm tree. It was just a massive tangle of thorns. I shot that iguana, and I picked that iguana up, and I thought, boy, this is heavy. Its belly was all pooched out. It was fat, big iguana. And I thought, you know what? I don't know how many days I'm going to be out this trail. And this iguana should last me a couple of days anyway. So I slung that thing over my shoulder. I didn't have a very big pack. I had a hammock. I had my little .22 rifle. And I don't even think I had extra clothes. But I had I had a Gideon Bible, because it was small enough to fit in my shirt pocket. And, you know, I think I had some candy. I just had some matches to build a fire. Had my machete and my knife. I think I had some fishing gear with me, just a hook and line. Just some basic survival stuff. And I'm walking on, and after about an hour, here my mind goes again with a question. Satan loves to ask questions. You know, it's the first question in the Bible. Satan asked Eve, are you sure you heard God right? Did God say? It's the first question. He asked a question. And be careful. The Lord declares His word. He don't ask you what you think about it. He just tells you the way it is. So, but you know what? This was a new experience for me. But the question this time was, how you going to talk to them? You ain't going to be able to talk to these people. What do you think got the other two men killed? They couldn't talk to them. They couldn't explain why they were there. That's why they were killed. That's why you're going to be killed. You know, and it just fear gripped my soul. How am I going to tell these people why I came to tell them about Jesus? If they don't understand English, which I'm sure they don't, and they don't understand Spanish, how am I going to tell these people why I'm even there? But I'm here to tell you that there was, again, that thought came into my heart. It was not as strong. It was soft and pleasant. And it made my faith come back up. It made my fear leave. It was, again, those same two words, trust me. And I realized this was Satan again. And I was learning right there that we have weapons to tear down imaginations and take our thoughts captive to the obedience of the Word of God, which says, God does not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. But you know what? I didn't really understand those scriptures. That was in those early years. But I was learning just to keep going. Don't turn back. Keep going. I don't care how scary it gets. Satan throwing block, the Lord's there with you. Well, I kept going in. You know, it wasn't too far after that. I wouldn't say, I'd say an hour. I kept walking. I started hearing voices. And when I heard voices of humans, I could only assume I had reached the end of that trail. And these may be the Chacos. Well, I didn't want to hesitate too long. This was a whole new experience. This is my first time really trusting the Lord. So I just took off and walked straight into that clearing. There were grass huts all in the line along the little river. And the thing that shocked me is nobody had clothes on. From my perspective, I mean, the men did have like a loincloth, and the women had a little thing that they wrapped around around their hips, called a paruma. Of course, I didn't know that then, and I just walked in and caught them as off guard as they caught me off guard. I was trying to blind my eyes. I was trying to look up, I didn't know where to look. I never even thought that I'd walk into a situation like that. I just walked up to a good-sized Indian man with long hair. They had their spears, and I just held the iguana. I just held it out to him, and he took it by the tail. And I said, Buenas tardes, which in Spanish is good afternoon. And you do not believe it, that man said, Buenas tardes. Now this was a miracle that I walked to that man. There was not another person in that village called Mahe that could speak a word of Spanish. How he knew Spanish, I do not know. Did a miracle happen like in the book of Acts? Did I speak Chaco? And I heard him speak Spanish? I do not know. But he understood me, but he was the only one that understood me. And I could feel something pulling on my shirt and my back. And it was these women feeling of my shirt, because they literally did not really understand cloth. And it was like a skin to them. And then that man, he laid that iguana down and he cut the belly open with his knife. And you know what? Eggs come out of that iguana's belly. A lot of eggs. Maybe 3 dozen eggs at least. And you know what? He jumped backwards. He jumped backwards. Everybody jumped backwards. And so he asked me in Spanish. He said, what is the message of God you have brought to us? And for a moment there, I was totally stunned. I hadn't been there 5 minutes. He wanted to know what was the message of God. How did he know? What in the world? How did he know that I was a carrier of the gospel of Jesus? And just quickly, I just asked him, do you know Jesus? ¿Conoces Jesus? And he thought about it for a minute, and he started asking some women and some of the other men, the Chaco or young men there. And he came back to me and he said, well, how tall is Jesus? And of course, I didn't know the answer to that question. Then he asked me, what color is Jesus' eyes? Does Jesus have skin like you? He was talking about my shirt. And he asked me several questions that I didn't have no answer for. So I asked him, I said, why are you asking these questions about what Jesus looks like? His height. I was confused. He said, we want to help you find your friend, and your friend Jesus. And but we need to know what he looks like before we can help you find him. And what he assumed was I had lost my friend Jesus, and I was looking for him, and they wanted to help me find him. Well, I'm here to tell you that I knew then Nobody else had ever been to these people and told them about Jesus. It totally shocked me. I didn't understand. How does he know? I found out after a year later, I learned that many of the culture of the Chaco tribe, Chaco Indians, that in their culture, an iguana with eggs at that time of year, here in Texas, would be like a deer having a fawn in December. It's just unheard of. It just don't happen. Could happen, but it would be a phenomenal thing, you know. And in their culture, they have a legend. At that particular time of year, iguana, if you find an iguana with eggs, that means that you have been spoken to by the great sky god, the unseen God. And you have been given a message, and you have to deliver that message. That was the Chaco culture. I found that out a long time later. But you see, there's no way I could have read that in a book. Nobody had really been working with Chocos in that particular area that I know of. And the Lord knew. And it blesses me. Let me tell you something. Can you imagine what that pearl means to me? Why would God do something like that for a guy like me, who was an atheist, who didn't believe in nothing until Jesus came in 1963, May the 10th, 10 o'clock at night? There was no school could have taught that. And there was a blessing of God for stepping out and going into the unknown, trusting Him. That's where the blessings are, brothers and sisters. And anybody, you want to find God, trust Him. You step out of the boat, He'll be there. You can trust the Lord. If you search with Him with all your heart, He will not let you down. He will be there. And that's just one of those nuggets of gold that I carry in my spirit. I don't forget that day. There's a lot of more experiences I'm going to share with you. They're just like that one. That's just not a coincidence. That was a miracle. As big a miracle as any miracle in the Bible to me. But the Lord, He saw a man's heart. And He saw a people that needed to hear about His Son. So, you know what? It was late then. They showed me where to put my hammock up in the Choco house with a little family. I strung that hammock up, and that's where I slept my first night in a Choco village. And I spent that night praying because the Lord told me real clearly, you cannot start with Jesus. You have to start, because if you start with Jesus, they're not going to understand. And you must understand. They believe you are a messenger from me. And you've got to get this one right. And you've got to start with the problem. Why man was separated from God in the first place. There in the Garden of Eden. And so that's what I had to do. I had to start with the Garden of Eden. And because Jesus Christ, you see, He's a solution. Fellowship was broken between humans and God there in the Garden of Eden. And we became alienated from God. All of us born with the sin of Adam in our blood. It's passed on down to us. But Jesus died to bring all men, those who believe, back in fellowship with the Father. And so, without Jesus Christ, you will never get to know God, the Father, in a personal way. He wants you to know Him, and He knows you, and He sent His Son to bridge that gap that we have with God, where we don't He bridged that gap where you can have a relationship with Him so powerful. He'll clean you so well that a holy God, Jesus, His Holy Son, and the Holy Spirit will come and live inside you. You will be their tabernacle. You will be their temple. You will be the place of fellowship. Your heart, your mind, your thoughts will be His altar. And your body will be a walking, talking vessel of the living God, carrying His presence to a confused and a dying world. That's the only reason there's a problem in this world. People who have fellowship with God, they're no problem. But it's the people who don't have a fellowship with God. Satan is still their father until they're born again of the Holy Spirit through Jesus Christ. They will not have any father but Satan, not only in this life but in eternal life to come. He'll still be their daddy. But those who accept Jesus Christ, this good news, and accept the bridge that the Lord sent to this world, died on a cross. Between heaven and earth, He was suspended. That was the only way to restore a fellowship that was broken. That Adam and Eve had with God. They walked and talked with God in the cool of the morning. They had wonderful fellowship. But through disobedience, that fellowship was broken. But Jesus comes to restore that fellowship. That's the good news. You can get back in good fellowship with God. And so, this story had to start back where the problem began. And the men would with me every night. There was a group of men around a fire. Children and women weren't even allowed. They believed this was such a powerful story. That I was such a God-sent messenger. That elders were the only ones, the men, not even children, young children, were not allowed to be there. This was too powerful for the ears of a child. And they hung on to every word. They believed every word I said. And the 2 weeks that I was there, they all came to Jesus Christ. They believed everything I said. And when they knew and they accepted Christ, all because God had put the key to their hearts through a lizard, through an iguana, which was put there by the Lord. And it was the key. It wasn't through a lot of training in some seminary. Maybe good for some. I didn't never have any. There cannot be faith, trust in the Lord. If you'll trust in God, He's got the answers. He's got the keys to how to get into any people. And so I stayed there, and then it came time that I realized I was so excited and days went by so fast. You know, one little part I got to share you, my first meal there. You know, in the middle of that first night, the little boy was catching rats out of the grass roof. He'd reach up and grab these rats and strangle them in his little hand. And that was his chores, I guess. And I could understand why, because if you have rats up above you, you have no ceiling, they might disturb your eating or your sleeping, you know. Because that was his job. But in the morning when I could smell something like fur burning, I looked over there, and sure enough, that lady, she took those rats. She was dipping them in boiling water. And she was pulling the hair off them rats like plucking a chicken. Well, you know, it did not take a rocket science to figure out they're going to eat them rats. And I had never, all I did is shoot rats in the dump. So I wasn't about to eat no brown rat. But I grabbed my little 22 and I tried to use charades and say, I'm going to go look for a deer out there. I'll be back. And I got out there. I thought I better get out of here because I'm not going to be able to eat that meal. Well, I got there by an old tree. Opened that little Gideon Bible. Fell right to Luke chapter 10. Here's where the Lord sent out his servants, telling them to whatever village they came into to eat whatever was put before them. Wow. That was just the way the Lord used the scripture to speak straight to me. I just said, Lord, I'm so sorry. I will, the next meal, I'll go ahead and I'll eat them if they have it again. You know, and, well, I stayed out there till I thought the sun got right above my head to where that meal would be over. Well, I'm here to tell you that when I got back and there was nobody in that house, I got up there in my hammock. I was going to rest a little bit. Here come that lady, little Chaco, little Indian gal. She come running up that balsa log. They make steps out of a balsa log where they can pull it up at night. Their floors are about 6 feet off the ground. You'll see some pictures here about what that looked like. Anyway, she came there. She had a big old gourd. It was like a bowl, half a gourd, you know. They make bowls out of those gourds. And I was sitting in the hammock, and she came and got down on her knees, and she handed me that gourd. And I could see the little feet sticking out of it. And she had other kinds of vegetables and fruit in there. And it was those rats. And I thought, oh man, I hope I don't throw up. But the Lord just gave me an image of a squirrel with a bald tail. It just kind of just gave me a revelation that these aren't dump rats. These rats out here, there's no dumps or garbage. They eat just what a squirrel eats, and you love squirrel. So with that, I went ahead and tasted it. It was delicious. But then I realized as I picked up about the third piece of meat, they had eaten all the rats, but they gave me the hind legs. The hind legs had the most meat on them. So that was how they honored me. They gave me the best portion of meat. I was so blessed. And so I went ahead and ate that meal. I've never had no problem eating them since. Haven't had to eat a lot of them. They ate some different stuff, though, that you're going to hear about. But then I had to leave. Oh, it was hard to leave, but I knew I had to get back to Betty, because if I stayed too much longer, I may not get back 3 weeks like I told her, and she'd sell that truck and be gone. So I stood there with the chief, the guy I had given the iguana to. He was the chief. And he said, well, we don't want you to leave. And I said, I have to go back. I have a wife and children too. And I got to get back to them and take care of them. He said, well, you must make me a promise before I let you leave. And I said, well, what is the promise? And he said, you have to tell my brother. You must find my brother. His name is Peronio. You got to tell him about Jesus, so he knows. And I thought, well, I'll be glad to tell your brother Peronio about Jesus. But you just tell me where he is, and I'll go and I'll find him. He said, oh, I have no idea where he would be. It's been years, many, many moons since I saw my brother. But he's out there in the jungle. Well, no, this jungle stretches all the way to Colombia. And I said, well, do you have any idea, like, the name of a river? Or where? He looked at me confused when I asked that question. He questioned my question. Why would you ask a question like that? And I said, well, how will I find him? He said, the same way you found me. Your God led you to me. Your God will lead you to my brother. Trust the Lord. At that moment, I realized that man had more faith than I did. That was how powerful. That's how powerful it is when you trust the Lord and go in by faith. You leave faith where you walk by faith.